unmated omegas of marriageable age are summoned to the high keep, that the king may look upon them and choose.
Gray was sitting in the middle of my yard when I opened the door, just sitting there. Like he had an appointment. Like he had always been planning to be exactly in that spot at exactly that hour, and the rest of the world had simply failed to receive the notice. Around him, arranged with a care that no wolf should have been capable of, was everything I owned that lived outdoors. My overturned smoking can, set upright, my scattered kindling. Gathered into a neat stack, my second-best bellows, the one I had dropped in the long grass behind the east hive 11 days ago and given up for dead, laid across my doorstep like an offering at a shrine. The wolf looked at me. Then he looked very deliberately at the bellows, then back at me, and I stood there in my doorway in the gray early light, holding the doorframe, trying to understand what I was looking at, which was a wolf in my yard, who had apparently spent the pre-dawn hours reorganizing my property. I would like to tell you, I handled this with dignity. I did not. But I am getting ahead of myself, because the wolf was not the beginning. The wolf was just where one morning started. The beginning was the day before that. The beginning was smoke and bees, and a sound I could not call back once it was out in the open air. The beginning was the laugh. I was working the third hive when the king's herald rode into Grafen. 24 winters behind me, 7 hives that needed me, a row of oak skeps along the south-facing slope that I had built myself, sealed myself, coaxed through 2 bad summers with nothing but patience and smoke, and the particular stubbornness that comes from having very little else to fall back on. The bees did not care about heralds. Neither, as a general rule, did I. So I kept the bellows moving, slow puffs, cool smoke drifting under the lid, the hive settling, the bees doing what bees do when you give them the right kind of quiet, which is everything they are supposed to do, in the right order, without anyone interfering. I found that admirable. Down the hill, the whole of Grafen had gone silent, which was unusual. Grafen was not a silent place. It was a village of 43 people and at least twice that many opinions, and on any given morning you could hear 3 arguments and a goat from my slope. But now, nothing, so I listened, by order and in the name of His Majesty King Aldric of the Iron Reaches. Fine. I had heard this before, or versions of it. Tax assessments, conscription notices, road levies, the usual business of a crown reminding its outermost villages that it existed and would like something from them. All unmated omegas of marriageable age are summoned to present themselves at the high keep before the next full moon. I set the bellows down, that the king may look upon them. I pick the bellows back up and choose. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it is the part everyone argues about, even now. Even years later, when people who were not there tell the story as though they were. I did not plan it. I did not stand on something and make a speech. I did not have a point I was trying to make or a cause I was trying to serve. I heard the words look upon them and choose. The way a man chooses at you at market. The way you evaluate something you are considering purchasing. And 4 years of being sensible came loose all at once. I laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not a skeptical exhale. The real kind. The kind that bends you at the middle. The kind that comes up from somewhere you did not know was full and exits without asking permission. It rolled down the hill, into the silence of the square below, and landed there the way a stone lands through thin ice. That particular sound. That crack. That moment before everything shifts. I heard it land, and then I heard nothing, because every person in Grafen had turned to find the source of that sound. 43 people and twice that many opinions, and every single one of them was now looking up the hill at me, and in the middle of them, on a black horse at the edge of the square, absolutely still, was a man I had never seen before in my life. I knew him the way you know weather is coming, not by looking at it directly, by how everything around him changed. The herald had gone the color of old candle wax. The village elders had folded themselves into bows. Even the horse looked like it was reconsidering its choices. And in the center of all of that, sitting on that horse like he had been carved from the same stone as the hills, was a man with dark hair pushed back from his face, broad through the shoulder, with the kind of jaw that looked like it had been built specifically to refuse things. He was looking up the hill, at me. I stopped laughing. I would like to tell you I held his gaze with noble defiance, that I stood my ground and stared back and communicated it through sheer camouflage, that I stood by every note of that laugh. What I actually did was pick the bellows back up and turn back to the hive and become very, very busy with bees that did not need me, which is the village equivalent of putting your hands over your own eyes and believing it works in both directions. It does not work in both directions. I learned that at dawn. 3 neighbors arrived that evening separately, in staggered intervals, each one with the specific expression of a person delivering terrible news they were enjoying entirely too much. You've insulted the crown. First neighbor, breathless, barely containing something, they say you could be hanged. Second neighbor, more solemn, same barely contained something, can I have the hives when they take you? Third neighbor, at least honest about it. I thanked all 3 for their concern and closed the door. Then I sat on the edge of my bed and thought about the look on that man's face when he had turned his horse and ridden away. Not angry. I had expected anger. I had been bracing for anger since the moment the laugh left my mouth. But it had not been anger. It had been something else. Something I did not have a clean word for. The expression of a person who has just heard something they were not expecting and are not entirely sure how to file it. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I was tired. I told myself the heat from the hives had gotten to me and I would feel more rational in the morning. I did not sleep. I heard my gate before first light, not the latch. My gate has no latch worth the name. The wood just swings. Has swung freely for 2 winters. I kept meaning to fix it. I kept not fixing it because there was nothing in my cottage worth a thief's trouble except the honey, and the bees guarded that better than iron ever could. So I heard the gate swing, and I thought, guards. Heart going like a disturbed hive, that low roar, that sense of everything buzzing at once. I stood. I pulled on my boots because if I was going to be arrested, I was going to be arrested with my boots on, and I crossed to the door and opened it before whoever was on the other side could knock. There were no guards, there was a wolf enormous. Gray. Shot through with black along the spine and shoulders. Sitting square in the center of my yard like he had a deed to the property, and the paperwork was in order, and around him, arranged with a precision that I cannot explain, that I have never been able to explain, was everything I owned that lived outdoors, smoking can, upright kindling, stacked bellows I had given up for dead. Laid across my threshold, the wolf looked at me, at the bellows. Back at me, no, I said, which was not a response to anything he had said. It was a response to everything the situation was implying. And behind the wolf, standing just past my broken gate with the expression of a man who has been brought somewhere entirely against his will by a part of himself he cannot govern, was the king of the iron reaches, not on a horse this time, on foot, at my gate, in the early morning dark, alone except for the wolf who was apparently running the operation. I stared at him. He looked at the wolf. The wolf looked at neither of us and appeared completely unconcerned with everyone's feelings about this arrangement. It would not stay, Aldric said. His voice was not what I expected. Lower. Quieter. The voice of someone choosing their words carefully in a language they were not sure they were fluent in. He stopped. His jaw did something complicated. I followed it. A pause. A very long pause. You walked here, I said, from the keep, which was half a day's ride. At dawn I followed him. Another pause. Shorter, but it cost him more. He would not be left. I looked at the wolf again. The wolf had shifted positions slightly during this exchange and was now sitting in a way that somehow suggested he found the whole conversation unnecessary. He had already handled the important part. The important part was the bellows. Why were we still talking? I looked at the bellows on my doorstep. He carried that back, I said. That is my second best bellows. I lost it in the long grass 11 days ago. Yes. Aldric's voice was the voice of a man looking directly at the evidence of his own situation and finding it difficult. It was in the long grass behind the east hive, I imagine it was. He went there. And came back. With the bellows. A pause that was almost a laugh, and was definitely not going to become one. Yes, I looked at the wolf. The wolf looked back at me with the patient expression of someone who has been waiting for the people in the room to catch up and is getting tired of it. What is his name? Gray. Of course. A wolf named Gray sitting in my yard in the gray dawn carrying back lost tools. He also stacked my kindling, I said. He does things like that, Aldric said. He stopped. Started again. He has never done this. With anyone. I let that land. I let it sit there between us in the early morning cold. Because it was a significant thing to say, and I was not yet sure what to do with significant things being said by kings in my yard before sunrise. You should go back, I said finally, before someone notices. He looked at me for a moment. Then he looked at Gray. Gray had stood up during this exchange and had crossed the yard and was now sitting directly on my feet, which I have to say is a more assertive move than I expected from an animal who had just reorganized my property in what I had assumed was a friendly gesture. Aldric looked at his wolf sitting on my feet. He looked like a man who had run out of arguments with himself. The summons, he said. You will have received it by now, or you will receive it shortly. He looked at me directly for the first time since he had walked through my gate. His eyes were not the eyes of a man calculating. It is to appear before court, not for the choosing. To answer for words spoken against the crown. A pause. I want you to know that it was not my. He stopped himself. It is not a request, he said instead. But you should bring whatever you would bring to a room where you need to say something true and have it heard. And then he turned and walked back down my hill. In the dark. The way he had come. Gray stood up off my feet. Gave me one last look. The look of someone completing a task they had been assigned and were satisfied with, and trotted after his king. I stood in my doorway holding the bellows I had thought lost, thinking about the word he had not finished. It was not my order, not my idea, not my decree, nothing I made, he had said in the square. Nothing I made, I told myself it was none of my concern. I told myself the bees needed me. I told myself a great many sensible things, standing there in the early light with a wolf's warmth fading from both my feet. Then I went inside and started getting ready. Because you do not ignore a royal summons. And because there was something I needed to say in that court. And I was going to say it clearly. I packed the bellows too. Out of stubbornness, out of something else I did not have a name for yet. The cart they sent was not comfortable. It was also not the worst half-day I had ever spent, because I was too busy thinking to notice the road, and thinking is something I do best when I have somewhere to be and cannot stop moving. I thought about the laugh, obviously. And the way his face had looked in the square, not furious, which was the face I had been expecting. The face that would have made sense. But something more contained than fury, and more confused than anger, and less finished than either. I thought about nothing I made. I thought about a decree that goes out across all of the iron reaches with the king's name on it, calling women to be looked at and chosen like livestock at a fair. And the king saying nothing I made, as though the decree had arrived in his hall the same way it arrived in everyone else's. I thought about who does make things in that hall, if not the king. I thought about a man walking half a day on foot before dawn because his wolf would not be left behind. And then the keep rose out of the pines ahead of us, and I stopped thinking about all of it because thinking time was over. The iron keep was not beautiful. That is the first thing you understand about it. It was not built to be beautiful. It was built to say something specific, and that thing was, we have been here a long time and we intend to continue. Greystone. Iron-banded doors thrown wide. Towers that had clearly survived things that they declined to discuss. A great hall inside that swallowed sound the way deep water swallows stones. I walked in with my back straight and a square of honeycomb wrapped in cloth tucked under my arm. Because if I was going to be made an example of, I was at least going to bring someone something sweet. The court was assembled, every chair occupied, every face arranged into the expression of someone who has been told there will be a spectacle and has arrived prepared to watch one. The lords of the iron reaches, the keep's senior council, the attendants and the scribes, and the people whose function I could not identify, but whose presence communicated clearly that this was a formal occasion. And the formality was pointed. At the head of the hall sat Aldric, on a chair of black wood that was not quite a throne, but was doing its best impression of one. Dressed differently than the figure at my gate. Armor now, a king's bearing, every inch of him composed into someone official. I recognized the jaw, the stillness, the particular quality of attention he was paying to a space slightly above the proceedings rather than directly at them, which is what a man does when he is in a room he does not particularly want to be in, but has decided to endure. And to his right, half a step closer to the seat of power than anyone else in the room had been permitted to stand, was a woman 50 winters, maybe, possibly more. The kind of face that had been striking once and had settled into something more severe and more interesting. A face like a ledger that had been kept meticulously for decades and was not going to reveal its contents to anyone who had not earned the right to ask. She was watching me walk through the door with the specific attention of a person who has been thinking about this moment for several days and has prepared extensively. I did not know her name yet. I would learn it. This, she said, before I had fully crossed the threshold, is the creature who mocked your law before your own people. The hall received this. Let it settle. Then she continued, quieter, more deliberate. A king whose decrees are laughed at in market squares is a king whose enemies are paying attention. I would remind this court that the distance between ridicule and rebellion is shorter than it appears. I want to tell you what made that speech so effective. Because it was effective. Impressively, architecturally effective. She did not accuse me, she accused him through me, and dressed it as concern. Every word in defense of the crown was a blade pointed at the man sitting in the chair beside her, wrapped so neatly in loyalty that you had to stop and look at it twice before you saw the edge. I stopped walking. I thought, this is the woman who wrote the decree. I could not have told you, at that moment, how I knew that. I just knew it the same way I knew which hives were struggling before I opened them. By how everything around the thing had arranged itself to point away from it. Speak, she said to me. Her voice was a closed door, being opened just wide enough to let me in and no wider. Explain yourself. I looked at Aldric. He had not moved. His jaw was doing the thing his jaw did. That specific tightening that I was beginning to understand meant something more complicated than anger. There was something behind his eyes. Something that had been there since the square and had not gone away. Something that was paying a different kind of attention than the rest of his face was showing. I thought about what I had heard in my yard. It was not I thought about 40 frightened women lined up in a hall waiting to be selected by a man who had never spoken to any of them. The very specific humiliation of that. The very specific cruelty of calling it an honor. I set the honeycomb on the rail in front of me, just to have somewhere to put my hands. I laughed, I said, because the decree was absurd. The sound that moved through the hall was very like wind through standing wheat. The woman, I would later learn her name was Lady Corson, did not bother to hide her pleasure. And what, she said softly, is absurd about a king taking a mate? Nothing. I kept my voice steady. A king taking a mate is the most natural thing in the world. I paused. It was the looking upon them and choosing I laughed at. The idea that you could line up 40 frightened women and know by the looking which one you could not live without. Another pause. My bees choose their queen better than that. And they are bees. The hall had gone very, very quiet, not uncomfortable quiet. Thinking quiet, you would want to know her, I said. Not to the court anymore. To the man at the head of it because he had finally looked up. Not past the proceedings, at me, directly. Not look at her, know her. And you cannot do that in a ceremony, no matter how many candles you put in the room. I was aware, in the way you are aware of things when you are concentrating very hard on something else, that this was probably the most dangerous sentence I had said yet. I said it anyway, so I laughed. I am sorry it carried. For a moment, nothing in the hall moved. Then Aldric stood. The entire court performed a single synchronized movement. A sort of collective flinch downward, shoulders dropping, chins tucking, the physical vocabulary of people arranging themselves beneath whatever was about to happen. The charge is dismissed. His voice was the same as it had been in my yard. Quiet, deliberate. The voice of someone choosing exactly the words they mean, and none of the ones they don't. She insulted nothing of mine. He looked at Lady Corson when he said it. Not past her, at her. Nothing I made. They told me I was to remain at the keep. Lady Corson announced it with the smooth efficiency of someone implementing a plan that had several more steps after this one. To answer further questions, she said. The court requires further. What questions? I asked. A pause. Very small. So small you might have missed it if you were not watching for the seam in the performance. The court will determine what is required, she said, which meant There were no questions yet. But there would be once she had decided what she needed from this particular situation. And in the meantime, I was to be kept where she could see me and where I could not go back to my valley and my bees and the life I had been living before I laughed at the wrong moment in the wrong direction. I was given a room near the kitchens. Small. Stone walls. A single window that looked out onto the herb garden, which had been thoroughly abandoned by whoever was supposed to be tending it. Bee balm going leggy. Thyme sprawling. Lavender that had given up its shape entirely and was expressing this in every direction. I told myself I would stay because of the garden. Because someone needed to save the bee balm before the first frost. Because a garden that had been given up on was not the garden's fault and did not deserve to be abandoned twice. Because there was useful work here, and useful work was always a reason to stay. I told myself these things very firmly. I believed approximately none of them. Gray found me on the first day. I was kneeling in the herb bed with my hands in the soil, cutting back the dead stems on the lavender, trying to see what was still alive underneath the mess. Focused. Useful. Not thinking about anything in particular. And then he came around the garden wall. Not running. Not urgent. The walk of an animal who had decided something and was arriving to implement that decision. And the decision was apparently, I will be here now. He dropped something at my knees. I looked down, a sprig of bee balm, fresh cut, still with the morning's moisture on it, not from the garden in front of me. This garden's bee balm was half dead and struggling, and certainly not producing anything worth cutting, from Grafen. I knew it by the particular way the leaves were shaped, rounder than the variety they grew in the Keeps County. By the smell of it, the specific combination of soil and sun and the particular slope behind my second hive. He had gone back. Half a day's run at least, and returned. And dropped it at my knees like it was nothing. Like it was the most obvious gesture in the world. Like, of course you go back and collect something from the place a person came from when they are stuck somewhere unfamiliar. Obviously, I sat back on my heels and looked at him for a long moment. He looked back with the patient benevolence of a creature who has completed a task and is waiting for the appropriate acknowledgement. Thank you, I said. Because what else do you say? A sound behind me. I turned. Aldric was standing at the corner of the garden wall. Not close, not in the garden. Just there, where the wall ended and the path began. As though he had been walking past and stopped. As though stopping were accidental. His hands were at his sides. Gray had been carrying that sprig for probably 2 hours minimum. And the king of the iron reaches had apparently followed his wolf to a herb garden to watch the wolf deliver it. And was now standing at the garden's edge with the expression of a man watching an argument he had been losing for several days reach its logical conclusion. I held up the bee balm, not saying anything, just showing him. He looked at the sprig, at me, at Gray. Gray did not look at either of us. Gray had moved on. Gray was now investigating something near the garden wall with the air of a creature who had done his part and was now off the clock. He does that, Aldric said finally. Brings things. He went back to Grafen, a pause. I know that is half a day's run, I know. I looked at the bee balm in my hand. Thought about Gray running through the dark, finding the specific path behind the second hive, pulling the stem carefully enough not to tear it, carrying it back, all this for a person he had known for approximately one morning. He has never done this, I said. You told me. With anyone, yes. And you followed him here, a longer pause. He would not be left, Aldric said. Which was the same thing he had said at my gate the morning before. I planted the bee balm in the bed in front of me, pressed the soil around it. It was probably too late in the season. It might not take. But I put it in the ground anyway. Because you do not carry something half a day and bring it to someone for them to let it die in their hands. When I looked up, Aldric was gone, but the garden gate was latched behind him, which was interesting, because the garden gate had no working latch. I looked at the gate. I looked at the latch. Older iron, a simple drop mechanism, the kind that needs 2 hands and a certain amount of patience to set. The kind that had probably not been set in several seasons, given the state of the garden, set carefully, deliberately. By a king who had apparently paused on his way out of a garden he had claimed to be walking past accidentally, to latch a gate that no one else had bothered with. I sat in the dirt for a while after that, thinking about gates, thinking about things that were not accidental. Thinking about a man who said nothing I made in a court, full of people, whose entire purpose was to tell him that everything that happened in this keep had his name on it. My bees choose their queen better than that. I had said it out loud, in his hall, and he had stood up and said, "She insulted nothing of mine, nothing." I pulled another dead stem out of the lavender and turned it over in my hands. Old, woody, had been struggling for a while before it finally gave up. Some things you can save if you get to them before the frost. Some things need someone to get their hands in the dirt and do the work, even when it is inconvenient, even when the season is late, even when everyone around you has already walked past and decided it wasn't worth the effort. I put the dead stem down. I got back to work. The first week at the keep had a rhythm I did not expect. Mornings in the garden, Gray appearing with the regularity of a messenger who had been given a route and intended to keep to it, dropping small things, a river stone, a feather, once an iron nail that I could not identify the origin of and have never been able to explain. Always with the same expression, always with the same quality of quiet satisfaction afterward. Evenings at a long table near the kitchens where the keep staff ate, where I was fed well and questioned by no one, where I could sit and think and listen to the sounds the building made when it thought no one was paying attention. Buildings tell you things if you know how to listen. My hive tells me when something is wrong by the quality of the buzzing, lower, more urgent, a vibration in the wood that you feel before you hear it. The keep talked too, its own language. Footsteps in corridors late at night, doors that opened and closed at particular hours, the specific silence that preceded Lady Corson entering a room versus the specific silence that preceded anyone else. I learned them all. Observation is the only weapon I have ever been particularly good at, so I observed. I observed Brennan, the king's second, broad-shouldered and quick-lawing, with the comfortable manner of a man who has been trusted completely for a long time and has decided to enjoy that rather than feel the weight of it. I observed that he looked at Aldric the way you look at someone you have fought beside through difficult things and are still surprised to find yourself genuinely fond of. I observed Dagna, the woman who had been brought to the keep as the sensible choice, the one the decree had been constructed to deliver. Lovely, composed. Young enough to still be performing composure rather than actually having it. I watched her watch the room. I watched her calculate. And I watched the particular exhaustion behind her eyes that comes not from cruelty but from a life that has been entirely managed by other people's decisions, which is its own kind of cruelty and one that leaves almost no visible marks. I observed Lady Corson. I observed her the most carefully because Lady Corson was the variable I did not understand yet. And the things you do not understand are the things that will solve you if you do not solve them first. She moved through the keep with the authority of someone who had built every system in it, which I was increasingly certain she had. Not loudly, not dramatically, with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had learned decades ago that the most durable power is the kind that does not announce itself. That operates through procedure and precedent, and the small architectural decisions that mean doors are placed where she decides doors should be placed. I watched her watch Aldric, and I noticed, the way you notice when something is almost right but not quite, that she watched him the way a craftsperson watches a finished piece that has been moved to a position they did not choose. Proprietary, alert, not hostile, not exactly, but with the specific attentiveness of someone who made something and intends to ensure it stays where they put it. I thought about that a great deal. I thought about who gets to own the things they make. I thought about whether being made by someone means belonging to them. I thought about a king who says nothing I made and means it as a line in the sand. On the fourth day, Brennan arrived at the herb garden with an entire cart. I do not mean a small cart. I mean a substantial cart. A cart that contained 3 sacks of good topsoil, a box of clay pots in various sizes, 4 varieties of seedling I had not asked for, and a set of proper garden tools that were significantly better than the ones I had been improvising with. I stared at it. Brennan stood beside it, with the expression of a man who is enjoying his morning very much. "The king sent this?" "The king sent his second," Brennan said, "to ensure the beekeeper has what she needs." He paused. His exact words, said them twice. Once clearly and once into his hand, which is when I knew he meant them. I looked at the seedlings. One of them was bee balm, which Gray had brought from Grafen and I had already planted. Someone had noticed that. Someone had gone to the trouble of sourcing more. He doesn't do this. Brennan offered, cheerfully, like a man who has been waiting his entire professional life for a specific type of event and is now witnessing it. I want you to understand that. I have served him through a siege and 2 border campaigns, and he has never, not once, sent me to supervise dirt. He is not supervising dirt. He mentioned the drainage situation in the East Bed, Brennan said. Specifically, I looked at him. He looked back, deeply pleased with himself. At council, he continued, he tried to mention you this week. A pause. Got halfway through your name and invented a cough. Entire table watched the King of the Iron Reaches cough into his hand. Lord Edveth of the Northern Valley is still confused about what he witnessed. I felt something in my chest that I did not think carefully about. You're enjoying this, I said. Madam, said Brennan, I have served that man faithfully through more difficulty than I will describe to someone I have known for 4 days. I have never once seen him lose a battle, a negotiation, an argument, or a game of cards. He picked up a seedling and handed it to me with ceremony. I am enjoying this more than I can put into words without embarrassing us both. I laughed. It carried. And from somewhere down the corridor behind the garden, from a wing of the keep, I had been learning the shape of slowly, the way you learn the shape of a hive before you open it. I heard a door that had been in the process of closing stop closing. And stay open. I did not turn around. I did not let myself look to see whose hand was on it. That was the problem with observation as a weapon. Sometimes the thing you notice most clearly is the thing you were not planning to find. And much later that night, long after I should have been asleep, long after the candle on my table had burned down to its last inch, the sound of footsteps in the passage outside my room, coming toward my door, stopping. Staying stopped for long enough that it was not an accident, was not a wrong turn, was not anyone walking somewhere else, just stopped, and then, slowly, walking away, I lay in the dark and listened to them go. I thought about gates, about latches, about the difference between a door left open and a door that someone comes to and stands outside of in the dark and cannot quite bring themselves to knock on, about a king who says it was not my, and stops himself before the end, about everything that is still unfinished. I picked up the bee balm cutting Gray had brought from Grafen. The dried one, the first one, which I had kept, and turned it over in my hands in the dark until the last inch of candle gave out. Some things you have to plant before you know if they'll take. The second week began with an inspection of the herb garden by the king. I want to be clear about what this looked like in practice. Because in theory, a royal inspection of anything sounds official, purposeful, the kind of thing that makes sense when you say it out loud to someone who has not witnessed it. In practice, it looked like this. Aldric appeared at the garden gate at mid-morning, dressed for council, which meant he had come directly from something official, or was about to go to something official, or had decided that dressing for council would make this feel less like what it was. It did not feel less like what it was. He looked at the beds, looked at the bee balm, looked at the lavender that was beginning, slowly and with great personal effort, to regain something resembling its original shape. Then he said, "How does the honey know which flowers to take from?" I set down my trowel, slowly. "I beg your pardon. The honey," he said, completely serious. The gravity of a man receiving intelligence reports from a contested border. How does it know? Which flowers produce it, and which do not? I looked at him for a long moment. "It's the bees," I said, "not the honey. The honey does not know anything. The honey is the result, a pause, the bees, then they follow the smell and the color. And things we don't fully understand yet. It is not one decision. It is 10,000 small decisions made by 10,000 different bees across a morning." He looked at the garden with the expression of a man filing this information under a category he had not previously had a reason to open. And they choose correctly. Usually, what happens when they don't? They try again, I said. There are always more flowers. He looked at me then, directly. For just a moment before he looked away. "That seems efficient," he said. And then he walked out of the garden the same way he had walked in, like a man who had somewhere important to be. Like a man who had definitely not just asked me a question about bees that was not actually about bees. I picked my trowel back up. Gray, who had been watching this entire exchange from his position near the east wall, got up, walked to the gate, watched Aldric leave, then turned and looked at me with the expression of a schoolmaster watching 2 students fail to complete an obvious equation. "I know," I told him. He went back to his wall. Brennan arrived 3 days running that second week. Always with something. Always with the cheerful energy of a man who has been given an assignment he finds personally delightful. Day 1. More seedlings. 2 varieties I had not asked for. Also a new pair of garden gloves that were noticeably better quality than anything a beekeeper from Grafen would purchase for herself. Day 2. A jar of something from the kitchens, preserved in oil. The cook thought you might want it, Brennan said. The cook has never once in 6 years thought about what anyone wanted. Day 3. Nothing from the cart, just Brennan. Sitting on the garden wall with the comfortable manner of a man who has decided this is his place now. He asked about the drainage in the east bed again. Brennan said, "How does he know about the drainage in the east bed?" "He walked through the garden after you went in last night. I looked up from the time I was tending. He walks through the garden." In the evening, Brennan examined a non-existent spot on his sleeve. "After you've gone in, Gray shows him where you've been working. He looks at it." A pause. "He doesn't touch anything. He just looks." I did not know what to do with that information, so I put it somewhere in the back of my mind where I was keeping all the other information I did not know what to do with, which was becoming a significantly crowded space. "You know," Brennan said, "at the last council session he mentioned the bee balm situation, used the word situation, about plants. Lord Edveth actually wrote something down, which I believe was the word situation with a question mark next to it. Why are you telling me all of this?" Brennan thought about it. "Because I have served that man through more difficult things than I will list," he said, "and I have watched him be excellent at all of them. Patient, steady, never rattled." He looked at me directly. "You rattle him, not badly, in a way that looks like it might be good for him. And I think someone should know that. The garden was very quiet. He was rattled before I got here," I said. "Yes," Brennan said, "but differently. Then the comb. I was going to arrive at this eventually. But I want to set the scene properly because the scene is important and the scene is also the funniest thing I have witnessed in my 24 years of life, including the time my second best hive swarmed directly into the open window of the village record office, and the clerk had to be retrieved from the roof. It was midday. The great hall was in use, some formal business of the court, lords assembled, scribes present, the full apparatus of governance doing whatever governance does when it gathers in large rooms and arranges itself importantly. In the center of this room was the gift table, for Dagna. Lady Corson had ordered it set that morning. A formal display of betrothal consideration gifts, the kind that get presented before a binding is announced, the kind that say this is the direction things are moving, without requiring anyone to say it out loud. At the center of the table was the comb silver. Garnet set along the spine, the kind of object that takes a craftsman a long time and costs someone a great deal. The kind of object that communicates something specific about intention and resources and the seriousness of what is being proposed. Gray walked into the great hall during the middle of all of this, through the main doors, which someone had left open, past the lords and the scribes and the 2 attendants whose specific job it was to stand near important tables and ensure nothing happened to what was on them. He walked directly to the gift table, took the comb, walked back out. The hall apparently went so quiet that one of the scribes later told me he thought for a moment that everyone had agreed to simultaneously hold their breath, which was not something they had discussed, but seemed like the right response. I was in the garden. I became aware of events when Gray appeared around the wall and dropped the comb at my knees with the absolute satisfaction of a creature completing an errand. I looked at it. "Oh no," I said. Then Aldric came around the wall, not running, but moving with the focused speed of a man who has been informed that his wolf has just done something in the middle of a formal court proceeding and would like to address this before the situation calms itself. He saw the comb. He saw me. He looked at Gray. Gray had adopted his post-errand posture, seated, dignified, facing away slightly. The bearing of a creature who has done what needed doing and declines to be questioned about the methodology. "He took it from the gift table," Aldric said. "Not a question. He put it in my garden," I said. "Also not a question. In front of the entire council, it appears so." A pause. He crouched down. "And this is the moment I want you to see clearly, because it is the moment everything shifted slightly." He reached for the comb, and his hands were not steady, not shaking, not visibly. But I was watching, and the hands of the king of the iron reaches. which I had seen perfectly composed in a courtroom and perfectly controlled at my gate in the dark, were not quite as still as they should have been when he picked up a silver comb that his wolf had just carried the length of his hall to deposit at my feet. "I will have it returned," he said. "Of course." He stood. Gray leaned his entire weight against my side. Warm. The warmth of a large animal who has decided you are the correct place to be and intends to make this clear to everyone present, including his owner. Aldric looked at the place where Gray's shoulder pressed into my hip. He looked at it the way you look at something that is happening to you. Not to someone else. To you. Even if it is technically happening to someone standing 3 feet away. He has never, Aldric said. He started, with anyone before. He has not. You told me yes, at my gate. You said the same thing. I remember what I said at your gate. The garden had gotten very small, or we had gotten very close to the center of it. I was not entirely sure when that had happened. He seemed certain, I said. A pause long enough to contain several unspoken things. He always has been, Aldric said. Certain about things, before I am. And then he looked at me, directly. The way he had looked at me from across the great hall when I had finished speaking and the whole court had gone silent. Not calculating, not measuring, just looking. Like he was figuring out something that he had been trying to figure out for longer than he wanted to admit. Gray pressed harder into my side. "I will have it returned," Aldric said again, and stood up straight, and walked out of the garden with the collected dignity of a man who has decided to behave as though none of the last 3 minutes happened.
Hi.
I looked down at Gray. Gray looked up at me. "He knows," I told him. Gray closed his eyes. The expression of someone who has been saying exactly this for weeks and is glad we are all finally on the same page. The letter happened on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because Brennan had just finished telling me that Tuesdays were council days. And council days were the days Aldric was most likely to say something he immediately regretted, which Brennan had catalogued extensively and apparently found instructive. I was not in the garden. I was in the lower corridor that connected the kitchen wing to the old storage rooms, carrying a basket of dried herbs from the garden stores to the kitchen. Because the cook had asked, and because I had been the one to harvest them, and because carrying useful things is the sort of task that keeps your hands occupied when your mind needs something to do. Lady Corson's study was off that corridor. The door was ajar. I was not trying to hear anything. I want to be clear about that. I was walking past. I was thinking about time and whether the second lavender cutting had taken. I was not positioned against walls or moving quietly for strategic purposes, but the door was open, and her voice carried. And what stopped me was not curiosity. What stopped me was that she was not talking to anyone. No response, no second voice, just hers, low and even in the particular register of a person speaking to someone who cannot speak back. I stopped walking. Not a long stop. 10 seconds. Maybe 12. But in those 12 seconds I heard a name I did not recognize, spoken the way you speak a name that has been kept somewhere private for a very long time. Not performed, not announced, just said. The way you say something true when you think no one is listening, and I heard. I was the one who made the arrangement. I knew what it was. I told myself it was necessary, that the alliance required it, that the right match at the right moment, a stop. I was very good at telling myself things. I moved on before she continued, but I carried those words with me the rest of the day. Down to the kitchen, back to the garden, through the evening and into the dark. I turned them over the way you turn over a stone you have found in unusual soil, not certain yet what it means, not certain you want to know. But unable to put it down, Lady Corson had lost someone, not recently. This was old grief, the kind that has been folded up and put away in a drawer that gets opened rarely but never thrown out. The kind that lives alongside everything else in a life and does not go away just because you stop talking about it. And she had made an arrangement, a match, a pairing, that she believed was necessary, that she believed served something larger than feeling, and it had cost her. Whatever it had cost her enough that she still spoke to the absence of it in a room alone on a Tuesday afternoon, 20 or 30 or 40 years later, with the door left open by accident. I thought about that. I thought about a woman who had watched something she loved get handed to a system that did not care about it and had decided. With the precision of someone who has already been broken once by randomness, that control was the only reliable protection. I thought about what you build when you have decided that love is a variable that needs to be managed. She is not wrong that unmanaged love causes damage. She is not right that managed love causes less. I did not know yet how to hold both of those things, but I kept them. Danga found me Thursday. I was not expecting her, which is perhaps naive in retrospect. I had been in the keep long enough to understand that nothing in it happened without someone's awareness. Lady Corson's awareness. The keep was organized like one of my hives, everything in it connected to everything else, every piece of information flowing back to a center. So when Dagnya appeared at the garden gate in the late afternoon light, I understood that her being there was not accidental. What I did not expect was her face. She was lovely. I had known that from the first day. Composed and carefully dressed in the way of someone whose appearance has been managed by other people's requirements for long enough that it has become a kind of armor. But now, in the low gold of an afternoon, in the second week of autumn, she looked tired. The specific exhaustion that is not physical. The kind that comes from wearing a face that is not quite your own for too long. She came through the gate and did not say anything for a moment, just looked at the garden, at what had come back. "You fixed it," she said, "working on it. It looked dead when you arrived. Most of it wasn't. It just looked that way. I kept working. Neglect and death can look similar from the outside." She was quiet for a moment. "I know I am a piece on a board," she said. "I stopped working. My family placed me here. They arranged everything. The introduction, the timing, the presentation." She said it without heat, without self-pity. The flat, factual tone of a woman who has been staring at the same truth for long enough that the bitterness has burned off and left something cleaner and colder underneath. I knew it when I arrived. I knew it every day since. "What do you want?" Not unkindly. "Not this." She looked at the keep's west wall. "Not any of this. Not the title. Not the hall. Not the ceremony." A pause. "I want to choose. Once. Anything. Anything at all." The afternoon light moved across the garden wall. "If he does not choose me," she said, "I go home unmarried. Which means I go home with nothing owed. Which means I am free to do the next thing myself." She looked at me then, directly. "You are the only person in this keep who is here because of something you did rather than something arranged for you. You walked into that court and said what was true. You did not calculate the consequence first." A pause. "I have spent my entire life calculating the consequence first." I thought about what to say. I laughed, I said. "I did not plan it. It came out and I could not call it back." "I know." Something shifted in her face. Not warmth exactly, but its neighbor. "That is what I am most afraid of and most envious of." Simultaneously, she looked down at her hands. "I am not your enemy. I know Lady Corson believes I am her instrument," said very quietly. "She asked me to watch you, from the first day you arrived." A pause. "I have been watching. I let that land. What did you find?" "Nothing," Dagna said. "You grow things. You talk to a wolf. You make people laugh in corridors and then look surprised that they heard it." She paused. "You do not know how to pretend. I have been watching for 3 weeks and you still do not know how." The garden was very still. "That is either," she said, "the most dangerous thing in this keep. Or the safest." She looked at me. "I have not decided which." She left before I could respond. I stayed in the garden until the light went, thinking about instruments, thinking about the woman who played them, thinking about what you build when you have decided that love, left unmanaged, destroys things, and what it costs you. In the end, the night in the gallery happened the way the true things always seem to happen, without planning. Without the dignity of having prepared something appropriate to say. I had taken to walking the upper gallery after the keep went quiet. There was a row of narrow windows along the north wall that looked out over the black pines and the distant dark of the valley, and from up there you could breathe in a way you could not in the corridors below. You could think. You could be a person who was standing somewhere of her own choosing, looking out at something larger than whatever was immediately pressing. I thought I was alone. The gallery was long. The far end was dark, and the figure at the last window was still enough to be part of the stone, which is how I was halfway down the corridor before I understood there was someone at it, Aldric. Cup in hand. Untouched. The pose of a man who had poured something and then forgotten about it, because the point had never been the drink. He heard me and did not send me away. That was the first thing he could have. A word, a look. He had the vocabulary for it. The king's vocabulary, the official face, the temperature that communicated this is not the time, and this is not the place, and you should find somewhere else to be. He had deployed it in the council hall. He had deployed it in corridors. He did not deploy it here. So I walked to the window one away from his, because instinct is instinct, and I said, "You said it was nothing you made." Not announced, just said. Because the dark makes you honest. I have always found that. Dark and height, the combination of them, removes the calculation in the court. Nothing I made, nothing of mine. I looked out at the pines. "Did you write it?" A long silence, the cup moved. He set it on the sill, too carefully. The way you set something down when your hands need something to do and you have decided. The hands are not allowed to do anything else. "You notice everything," he said. "It is the only thing I am particularly good at. It is not a small thing." He looked out the window. "My father died when I was 9. Not an answer. The whole answer. Lady Corson took the regency. Held it for 11 years. He paused. She was good at it. I will not pretend otherwise. The territories were stable. The borders were managed. Things that had been in disorder were put in order." Another pause. "She is genuinely capable. That is what makes it complicated. People who are capable of good things," I said, "are also capable of believing that gives them the right to other things." He looked at me for a moment. When I came of age, he said, "She did not step back. Not all the way. There were always reasons. Always one more thing that needed managing. One more situation that required her experience. One more decision that was better made with her guidance." His jaw tightened. The decree was the latest. A mass choosing. A betrothal she had already selected the conclusion of. A Luna who would owe her position to my aunt and not to me. "You refused it, for a season." He looked down at his hands on the sill. "She brought it to council without me, while I was at the northern border. By the time I returned, the heralds had ridden. You could have called them back. I could have." He turned. In the dark, I could see the shape of him more than the detail. But I have never needed much light to hear a man's voice change, and his changed in that moment. Not louder, not softer. Something more precise than either. And every lord in the iron reaches would have learned that their king cannot govern his own council, cannot hold his own hall. He stopped. "That is how thrones end," he said, "not in battles. In the small moments when people stop believing the man in the chair has the right to be there." I thought about all the ways a person can be controlled without being touched. "So you let it stand." I let it stand. And I told myself I would refuse the bride when the choosing came. Find some way to make the refusal look like strength instead of desperation. A pause, and then a woman on a hill laughed at the whole construction, in front of my entire village, and I heard it, and rode to her gate at dawn. "I followed Gray to her gate at dawn," he said, which was technically a different thing. And also I thought, not the gallery was cold. I did not feel it. "Why are you telling me this?" you asked. He almost smiled. I heard it more than saw it, and because no one has asked me a true question in 11 years. He looked at me. "They ask what I command. They do not ask what I want. What do you want?" He did not answer that one, but he did not leave. We stood at our separate windows in the dark, while the pines below moved in a wind we could not feel from up there, and the silence between us was the fullest thing I had ever stood inside, not empty, not waiting. Fool. The way the air before a storm is full, with everything that has not happened yet. I left first, eventually. Walked back to my room, lay down without sleeping. I thought, that was a more dangerous gift than anything Gray has put at my feet. A man telling you the truth of his life in the dark is a different thing than a man performing his life in the light. Different rules, different weight, different consequences. I told myself to be careful. And then I lay there, in the dark, being not careful at all. The morning after the gallery was bright, cold. The first real cold of the approaching season. Brennan was already in the garden when I arrived, not cheerful this time. He was sitting on the garden wall with the posture of a man who has something to say and is not certain of the right way to say it. Which on Brennan looked strange. Brennan had never, in all the time I had observed him, appeared uncertain about the right way to say anything. I stopped. "What happened?" "Nothing yet," he said. "That is the problem," he told me quickly, without the usual warmth. The way soldiers tell you things, clean, direct, no softening because softening wastes time you might need. Lady Corson had been building something, for 3 weeks, since the day I arrived, quietly, with the patience of someone who does their best work when no one is watching, a charge. The old kind. Craft compulsion against a person of authority. old law, rarely used, designed for a different era, but still on the books because old law does not remove itself. It just waits. The evidence she had assembled was circumstantial and artfully arranged. Wren's honey in the hall's kitchen. Aldric's behavior over the past 3 weeks. The garden visits, the questions, the council moment with the cough, catalogued and reframed as symptoms of influence rather than choice. It does not need to be airtight. Brennan said, it needs to be plausible enough for the right 4 lords to nod. What happens if it passes? He looked at me. I already knew the answer. I just needed someone to say it out loud so I would stop being able to pretend I did not. Exile. Or worse. The council decides which. The cold of the morning had gotten more specific. When, if she moves before the next moon session, which I believe she will. He looked down at his hands. Within the week, I sat with that for a while. A week. 7 days. 7 mornings in the garden and 7 evenings, and the possibility of the gallery again, or something like it. Or none of that. Exile. Or worse. For laughing at the wrong moment at the right thing. For having the kind of laugh that carries. For not knowing how to pretend. He knows. I said yes. And he is going to do what he believes will protect you, Brennan said carefully. Which may not be what you want him to do. I understood. I did not like it, but I understood. He called for me that afternoon. Official summons. Formal language. The kind of language that arrives via a page in the king's colors and announces that the king requires your presence. Not in the garden. Not in the gallery. The receiving room. Stone walls. 2 chairs and a table between them. The room where official things get said officially, and there is nowhere comfortable to stand. Aldric was at the window when I entered. Gray was not there. I noticed that immediately. Gray was always there. Gray's absence was its own kind of information. He turned when the door closed, and his face was wrong. Or rather, it was right in the way that it had been wrong before he started coming to the garden. The official face. The composed face. Every line of him arranged back into the shape of a king conducting business. You should leave the keep, he said. I said nothing before the next council session. There are reasons. I know the reasons. A pause. Then you understand. I understand what you are doing, I said. I am asking you if it is what you want to do. His jaw tightened. Is that a distinction you think is? Yes, I said. It is the only distinction that matters. The room was cold. Or maybe I was cold. Go back to Grafen, he said. Quiet, careful, each word chosen to your hives. I will find a way to manage what comes after that does not. Does not what? He did not answer. Does not put me in danger, I said. Or does not require you to choose between managing it safely and choosing it honestly. His eyes came up. I held them. Because those are different problems, I said. And I think you know that. And I think the fact that you are standing at that window, instead of the one in the gallery, tells me which one you are trying to solve right now. The longest silence of the conversation. Go, he said. Barely a word. More like a word skeleton. Please. Please. He had not said please before, not once, not to anyone, as far as I had observed. The king of the iron reaches did not say please, he instructed. He decreed, he considered and decided and announced. He said please to me in a cold room with Gray deliberately absent. I turned and went to the door, stopped with my hand on it. I am not going back to Grafen, I said, without turning around. But I will stay out of the corridor for the rest of the day. Because that is what I am choosing. Not because you told me to. He said nothing. I went. Gray was outside the receiving room door, waiting, not for him. Facing away from the door, sitting in the corridor like a creature who had excused himself from an official meeting and was now available for other assignments. He fell into step beside me. We walked to the kitchen corridor, through the small door into the garden. The cold was harder now, real. The kind that tells you summer is finished making its case and has decided to let autumn speak. I sat down in the dirt next to the bee balm. Gray sat next to me. I put my hand on his back, the thick fur, the warm animal weight of him, breathing slowly, settled. He is trying to protect me, I said. Gray breathed by sending me away. Gray put his chin on my knee, which is, I stopped. Which is the same thing she does, just softer. Just with more, it is still deciding what happens to someone else, because you have decided you know what is best for them. Gray looked up at me. Is that unfair of me? Which I took as, maybe, but you are also allowed to have the thought. The cold moved through the garden, the bee balm had taken. That much I could see clearly. It had rooted, had unfurled, was doing what living things do when they are given the right soil and someone who bothers to get their hands dirty for them. Not dead, not even struggling, just waiting for the season to turn in its direction. I stayed in the garden until the kitchen lights came on. Then I went inside, ate with the kitchen staff, went to my room, did not go to the gallery, lay in the dark and thought about a man standing at the wrong window. The footsteps came later that night, later than before. After the midnight watch had made their round and the keep had gone to the second level of its nighttime quiet, the deeper one, where only the things that will not stay quiet keep moving. Down the passage, to my door, stopping, staying stopped longer than before, long enough that it was not uncertainty. Long enough that it was a choice being made and unmade and made again. I lay in the dark. I did not move. I counted the pause on the other side of the door, not audible exactly, but perceptible, the held quality of a silence that has a person inside it, then it moved away. Slowly, I listened until it was gone. Then I lay there in the full dark and thought about gates. About latches. About the particular courage required to come to a door and the different kind of courage required to knock on one. About the difference between protecting someone and trusting them. About a king who says please and does not know yet that it is the most kingly thing he has said. I picked up the dried bee balm cutting from the table beside my bed. Turned it over in my hands in the dark. Some things you plant before you know if they'll take. Some things you go to the door of before you know if you are ready to knock. I was not ready. But ready and necessary are not always the same thing. Tomorrow, then, the door, my hand on it first. I knocked on his door at the second hour past midnight. Not the gallery, not the garden, his door. The actual door to the king's private receiving chamber, which no beekeeper from Grafen had any reasonable business standing in front of at this hour. I stood there for a moment before I knocked, just a moment, thinking, this is the part where a sensible person turns around, thinking, you've been told to leave. You have been told clearly, by a king, with the king's face on, using the king's voice. And the sensible thing, the careful thing, the thing that a woman with 7 hives and a broken gate and no particular interest in being exiled does, I knocked 3 times. Deliberate, the door opened. Brennan, of course Brennan. He looked at me, then at the corridor behind me, then back at me. His eyebrows had achieved an altitude I had not previously witnessed. It is the second hour, he said. I am aware. Past midnight. Yes. He looked at me for another moment. He told you to leave. Brennan said. He suggested I leave, I said. There is a difference. A pause. Then Brennan stepped aside, because Brennan, I had come to understand, was a man who had been waiting a long time for something to move in the right direction, and he was not going to be the door that stopped it. Aldric was at the window. Again. The same window. The same posture. Cup untouched on the sill beside him, which was becoming something of a pattern. He turned when he heard the door, saw me. Something moved across his face. Fast, gone before it finished arriving, but I had been watching his face for 2 weeks and I caught it. Relief. Under everything else. Under the composure and the calculation and the official face. Relief. That I was still here. That I had not gone. That the corridor outside his door contained the person it contained. He covered it quickly. You should not be here, he said. Probably not. I gave you a clear. You suggested I leave, I said. I considered it. I am not going. His jaw did the thing. Wren, someone, I said, is going to swear a blood oath out of your mouth tomorrow if you let them. And I came here to make very sure that you understand. Before that happens, that you are allowed to say what you actually want. I met his eyes. That is all. That is the only reason I am here. The room was quiet. I am not here for you to choose me. I said, I want to be direct about that. I am here because you told me no one has asked you a true question in 11 years. And this is the last night before tomorrow. And someone should ask. He looked at me. What do you want? I said. Not what manages the situation, not what protects the throne, not what Lady Corson has arranged. Silence, long silence, the kind that has a person inside it who is working through something real. If I say it, he said finally. Quiet, almost careful, out loud. In this room, yes, it becomes a thing that exists. It already exists, I said. Gray has been announcing it to everyone in this keep for 3 weeks. You are the last to say it out loud. Something happened in his face. Not breaking, not softening. More like ice that has been holding against a current for a very long time, deciding finally that it has held long enough. And if I say it, he said, and you leave anyway, Back to Grafen, to your hives. Then you will have said a true thing, I said, and it will have existed, and that is not nothing. The window behind him showed the black of deep night. No moon, just the dark and the distant shapes of the pines. I do not want the ceremony, he said, low, like a confession. I never wanted the ceremony. I do not want a woman chosen by process. He stopped, his hands on the sill, not quite steady. I have wanted, for 11 days, to go back to that garden. Every time I leave it. I have wanted. He looked at me. I want to know what you think when you are working in the early morning before anyone else is moving. I want to know which hive is your favorite and why. I want to know what you were going to say when you laughed and then stopped laughing in that square. A breath. I want to know you. The way you said it in the court. Not look at you, know you the room. Very still. Tomorrow, he said, changed, settled. Like a man who has put something down that was very heavy and is finding out, with some surprise, that he can still stand. Watch what I do. And do not laugh until I tell you it is funny. I looked at him. Is it going to be funny, the corner of his mouth? Just slightly. Parts of it might be. Gray walked in from the adjoining room, where he had apparently been the entire time, having staged his absence from the receiving room, only to relocate 14 feet to the left, and lay down across the doorway with his back against the frame. So the door could not close, from either side. Aldric looked at his wolf, then at me. He did that on purpose, I said. He does everything on purpose, Aldric said. He has never once in his life done anything by accident, and for the first time since I had walked into his keep, since the court and the garden and the gallery, and all the careful distances between all the windows we had stood at. He looked at me without the official face, without the calculation, without the weight of 11 years of being managed, pulling at every line of his expression, just him. Standing in a room at the second hour past midnight, having said the thing he wanted. Tomorrow, I said. Tomorrow, he said. I stepped over Gray, went back to my room, did not sleep, did not need to. Morning came the way mornings come before things that matter. Too fast, too bright. The specific quality of light that seems designed to make everything feel more consequential than you prepared for. I dressed. Ate nothing. Went to the garden because my hands needed something, and the garden was the place my hands went when they needed something. Gray found me at the bee balm, sat beside me, did not bring anything this time. Did not need to. Just sat. The warm weight of him against my side. Steady. Breathing slow. The breathing of an animal that has done everything it could do and is now simply present for whatever comes next. If this goes wrong, I told him. He pressed harder into my side. Right, I said. Unhelpful. He rested his chin on my knee, which is not a logical response to anything I said, but which was somehow exactly the right thing. The council hall was full. I had seen the great hall before. Formal, assembled, the court arranged for business. But this was different. This was the full weight of the iron reaches in one room. Every lord who owed Aldric fealty, plus several who owed it to his memory of his father, plus the ones who owed it to whatever they believed they might gain by being present at a significant moment. Every seat occupied. Scribes at the sides, candles, despite it being morning. Because some moments want candlelight. Because someone had decided this occasion warranted the full ceremony and had arranged accordingly. At the center, the table, the cloth, the silver bowl. The old priest with the old words written on prepared calfskin, the blood oath rite that had not been performed in this hall in living memory, because it required a willing participant or a very convincing arrangement of circumstances. Dagna at the right position. Pale gold. Composed. The armor on her face perfect. Her hands at her sides, absolutely still. Lady Corson at her place, half a step closer to the center than anyone else. The face of a woman who has been building toward this moment for 3 weeks and has made absolutely certain that this morning has no exit. And Aldric in his seat. Armor. The full weight of what he was wearing, the full bearing of what he was. Looking, to anyone who did not know the set of his jaw, like a man who has arrived at an arrangement and intends to complete it. I stood at the back, between 2 stone columns, where a beekeeper belonged, where a person who had been told, several times, by several people, that she had no standing here would naturally stand. I stood there and watched. Lady Corson rose. We gather today to complete what was begun by the king's own decree. Her voice filled the hall, practiced, resonant. The voice of someone who has been speaking in rooms like this for decades and knows exactly where the sound goes. a binding between the king of the iron reaches and his chosen. I have not chosen, not loud, not performed. Quay, clear, the voice from the gallery, the voice from the garden, the voice of a man who has decided something and is not interested in pretending otherwise. The hall did not go quiet. The hall went suspended. Like the moment between the lightning and the sound that follows it. Everything held. Everything waiting. Lady Corson did not move. "Your Majesty," she said. "Very careful, very steady." The decree was not written by my hand, the first crack. Somewhere in the assembled lords, a sound. Not words, just response. The sound a room makes when something has shifted, and everyone in it felt it shift. Aldric stood. And here is what I want you to understand about that moment. Because I have thought about it a great many times since, and I keep coming back to the same thing. He did not stand like a man winning an argument. He did not stand like a man who has been waiting to make a speech and is now delivering it. He stood like a man putting something down, something he had been carrying for 11 years, Heavy. And the act of setting it down visible in every line of him. "I let the decree stand," he said, "to the assembled lords. Not to her, to them. Because I believed a king who could not govern his own council would lose his throne. I was wrong." A pause. "A king who allows others to speak his vows in blood has already lost what for a throne is for." Murmuring. Real murmuring. Lords looking at each other. Scribes' hands uncertain over parchment. "I tell you plainly," he continued, "before all of you, that for 11 years I have been governed in private by the woman who raised me. And I am ending that today. In public." He looked at the assembled faces. "Judge me weak for saying it. I would rather be a king who can be told the truth than one who cannot be reached by it." The hall erupted. Not in unison. In the specific chaos of 50 people all deciding simultaneously to have an opinion about the same thing. Voices. The scrape of chairs. 3 lords talking at once and none of them to the others. And in the middle of it, sees the beekeeper. Lady Corson, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through cloth. Aimed at the columns where I was standing. She has worked a compulsion on the king's mind. She has used craft against a person of authority. Take her from this hall. 2 men, her men. Moving toward my columns before the words had finished, landing fast. Coordinated. The movement of people who were given an instruction in advance of the moment they were told to implement it. I had approximately 3 seconds. I grabbed the iron rail of the gallery partition beside me, both hands, cold iron. The specific cold of metal in an unheated hall in early morning, and I held on, not with strategy, with the instinct of a person who understands that the moment you let go is the moment you disappear into the noise, and no one sees what happens next. The cut happened when I gripped too hard. The iron edge, sharp, old, the kind of edge that has been catching on things for generations and is very good at it. My palm, not deep, but immediate. I did not let go. I found my voice. He has not chosen, loud enough. Loud enough to cut across the noise the same way Lady Corson's had. Because if there is one thing I have in this world that belongs entirely to me, it is the kind of voice that carries. "He has not chosen," I said again, into the suspended chaos. "He has refused to be chosen for." Those are not the same thing. Any person in this room who has ever been handed a life and told to call it a gift. I looked at the assembled faces, the lords, the scribes, the attendants, the people whose names I did not know, but whose faces I had been watching for weeks. You know the difference. The hall had found a new quality of silence, the kind that comes after something true. And into it Gray. He came through the main doors, which someone had not thought to close. Because who closes the doors against a wolf when you are arranging a blood oath? And he walked the length of the council hall the way he did everything. Without hurry, without drama. The walk of a creature who has decided where he is going and finds the distance unremarkable, past the lords, past the scribes, past the priest with the blood bowl, past Dagna, standing in her pale gold, who watched him pass with the expression of a woman who is absolutely certain she is witnessing something that will be told as a story for a very long time, past Lady Corson. He did not bow, did not pause, did not acknowledge anyone who outranked him, which in this room was technically everyone. He walked to the back of the hall, to the columns, to me, and he lay down at my feet, put his great head against my knee, and looked up at the assembled court of the iron reaches with the expression of an animal who has been saying one thing for 3 weeks through every means available to him, and is simply confirming, for the record, that he stands by it there. He seemed to say, Now you all know. I have been telling you, the hall was completely still, and then Aldric walked down from the dais, not quickly, not with ceremony. The walk of a man who knows where he is going and is not going to pretend he does not. Past the senior lords, past the council table, past the priest and the blood bowl and everything Lady Corson had arranged for this morning, to the back of the hall, to the columns, he stopped in front of me, and he went down. Not the bow of a king to a subject, lower. One knee, the knee of a man making himself level with someone, bringing himself down to the height of a person looking up from a garden, from a hive, from the honest ground where things are grown, so that for the first time since a hill in Grafen, his eyes were below mine. I looked down at him. The entire court of the Iron Reaches looked at both of us. Gray knew you, he said, before I let myself know it. It has been trying to give you everything I own for a month, and I have been apologizing for it. A pause. Not for effect. Because the next words required something. Because I was too proud to admit it was right. He took my bleeding hand, the one that had gripped the iron, turned it palm up, held it in both of his, forgive it the comb. He looked up at me. Forgive me the decree. I cannot offer you a choosing. I cannot line you up with 40 others and look at you and call that a decision. Another pause. I can only ask, with my own mouth, the way you said it should be done, will you let me know you? For the rest of my life. However long that is the hall, not breathing. 50 lords and their attendants and all the scribes and the old priest with the blood bowl and Dagna in pale gold and Lady Corson with her closed ledger face, all of them waiting. I looked down at Aldric, on one knee, on the stone floor of his own council hall, holding my bleeding palm. I thought about the laugh that started it, the dawn at my gate, the bellows in the grass, a wolf running half a day to bring back a sprig of bee balm, a gallery in the dark and the fullest silence I had ever stood inside, a man who had said please, once, who had not said it before in his life that I could tell. I thought, this is the moment, I thought, say something true. You will have to fix the door latch first, I said. The hall was so quiet I could hear the candles. The latch at my cottage in Grafen. It has been broken for 2 winters. If I am going to be a Luna of the Iron Reaches, I will not live behind a door that does not catch. Something happened in his face, something that had been held very tightly for a very long time by a jaw that had been built to hold things. Let go. He laughed. Not the practiced sound of a king acknowledging something. Not the polite amusement of a man in an official setting finding something tolerable. The real kind. The kind that comes from somewhere you did not know was full. The kind that exits without asking permission. It filled the hall. And when he kissed me, in front of the entire assembled court of the Iron Reaches, on his knee on the stone floor with my bleeding hand in both of his. The hall did not know whether to be scandalized. Several people tried. I respect the attempt. Lady Corson did not disappear. Villains rarely do. That is the thing stories get wrong. They do not vanish in the moment of defeat. They stand there, in the room, while everyone else adjusts. While the air changes and the arrangements shift, and the thing they built gets quietly disassembled. She stood there, after, when Aldric had risen and the hall had found its new shape, and the scribes were looking at their parchment, trying to figure out what exactly they were recording. I looked at her. She was looking at Gray, who was still at my feet, who had not moved since he had walked the length of the hall and established the fact of himself. Her face was not what I expected, not fury, not the calculation of a woman deciding her next move. Something more interior than that, something that looked, if you watched it carefully, like a woman standing in front of a mirror she had been avoiding for a very long time. I crossed to her. I want to be honest about why. It was not generosity. It was not even understanding, not fully. It was observation, the thing that has always been my only weapon. And observation had been telling me something about this woman for 3 weeks, since the corridor and the open door and the name she had spoken to a room with no one in it. I stood in front of her, and I said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "You lost someone. I think you were the one who arranged what happened to them. I think you have been trying to prevent that from happening to anyone else, to him, ever since." She did not answer. "I think you are the most capable person in this keep," I said. "I think you have spent 11 years using that capability to solve a grief that cannot be solved by managing things." A long silence. "You do not know what you are talking about," she said. But she said it quietly, the way you say something you want to be true, Not the way you say something that is. No, I said. Not completely. But enough. I left her standing there. There was nothing else I could do for her. There was probably nothing anyone could do for her except what time does. Slowly, when you finally stop moving fast enough to stay ahead of it, then Dagna stepped forward. Not to Lady Corson, to the room. To the assembled lords who were still murmuring, still uncertain, still watching the shape of things settle. She spoke without being asked, without ceremony. With the flat, clear voice of a woman who has been deciding how to say something for 3 weeks and has finally chosen the moment. Lady Corson asked me to watch her, Dagna said, from the first day she arrived in this keep. Every movement, every meeting, every person she spoke to, the room went quiet again. I did, Dagna continued. For 3 weeks, I recorded everything I observed. She looked at Lady Corson, and I found nothing. No craft, no compulsion, no powder in the honey, no arrangement of timing, no strategy I could name. She looked at the court, only a woman replanting bee balm in the dirt who does not know how to pretend. The silence after that was different, heavier. More final, the kind of silence that means something has been completed. Aldric gave Lady Corson the choice himself. That afternoon. In the study where she had built her power over 11 years. Without ceremony, without the court, the Western estate. Full income, comfort. Everything she had earned through 11 years of genuinely competent governance. Acknowledged, accounted for, honored, and no role, no counsel, no voice in appointments. No seat at the table where decisions about the iron reaches were made. She sat with it for a long moment. The alternative, he said, is a formal proceeding for executing a blood oath rite in the king's name without his hand, which the old law classifies as its own kind of treason. I know what the old law says, she said. I know you do. They looked at each other, 11 years in that look, a boy of 9 who she had raised when she did not have to. A kingdom she had held together when holding it together was genuinely difficult. A lifetime of competence offered in place of the simpler thing, the thing she had stopped believing in, the thing she had decided cost more than it gave. The Western estate, she said, the Western estate. She left within the month. I heard later that she had taken the portrait with her. Not left it on the wall, taken it. Which is not the gesture of a woman who has finished with something. Which is the gesture of a woman who has decided to carry it differently. I do not know what to make of that. But I find, when I think about it, that I am glad she took it. Dagna left faster, 3 days after the council. With the specific efficiency of a woman who has been ready to leave for a long time and was only waiting for the door to be unlocked. She came to the garden before she went, stood at the gate. Not inside. Just at the edge. He is going to be difficult, she said. The king, I know, he is going to try to manage things. Old habit. She looked at the garden, at the bee balm. You will have to keep doing what you did, asking the questions he does not expect. I intend to. She nodded. Once. The nod of a woman completing an accounting. The comb, she said. I was going to have to wear it at the ceremony. Silver. Garnets. A pause. I have never liked garnets. Gray has excellent instincts, I said. Something moved in her face. Not quite a smile. Its structural ancestor. Yes, she said. I think that is probably true. She walked away with the bearing of a woman who has just set down a significant weight and is figuring out, with some surprise, how different it feels to walk without it. She was married within the year to a man she found herself. She sent a letter, short, the careful handwriting of someone who does not write letters easily. 2 sentences that mattered. 1 sentence of formal well-wishing that we both understood was for the sake of having 3 sentences instead of 2. Thank you for the comb I never had to wear. I kept the letter. I keep all the things that are honest, even when they are short. 6 months, full summer, the kind of summer that comes to the iron reaches like it means to make up for something. Heat on the stone walls. The herb garden gone riotous. Bee balm 3 times the size it had been in autumn, lavender standing straight, time spreading across the edges of everything, with the cheerful territorial ambition of a plant that has been told it belongs here and has taken this information seriously. 9 hives in the south garden. The first 7, brought up from Grafen on straw carts by neighbors, who had, by this point, fully committed to the story that they had always known I was destined for something extraordinary. And could they perhaps visit the keep sometime? And also would I mention them to? Yes, them. I would mention them. Brennan had developed what I can only describe as a systematic relationship with the honey stores. He arrived every third day with a reason that got progressively less convincing. The king requested it. Then, the kitchen asked me to check the inventory. Then, eventually, I wanted some, and I knew you would not stop me. He was right. He blamed Gray. Gray accepted the accusation with the dignity of a creature who understood that absorbing minor blame in exchange for additional honey was an excellent arrangement and saw no reason to renegotiate it. Aldric fixed the latch, the first week, himself. Brennan offered twice to send a craftsman. Aldric declined twice in the specific tone that means this is not a negotiation. Got a set of tools from the keep's workshop. Spent an afternoon on his knees in my doorway. Our doorway. It was becoming. Fitting iron, testing the drop mechanism, adjusting, testing again. I held the lamp, offered advice. He told me my advice was not useful. I agreed cheerfully that this was probably true and offered more of it. He said something under his breath that I did not catch, but that made Brennan, who had appeared at the yard gate to witness this, cover his mouth with his hand. The latch caught, clean, solid. The specific sound of iron fitting into iron properly. A sound that means something has been done right, that two pieces of metal have found the precise relationship they were built for. Aldric tested it 3 times. Stood up, looked at it, looked at me, said nothing, which was fine. Some things do not need to be said. Now it is evenings, the light going gold over the keep's stone. The specific sound the south garden makes when the wind moves through it. The bee balm, the lavender, the hives settling into their evening rhythm, that low collective hum that means everything is working the way it should. Every evening he comes back from whatever the day has required. The council, the borders, the 1,000 things a king is responsible for that I am still learning the shape of. He crosses the yard, he takes the latch in his hand, lifts it, comes in. I told him he could leave it open. I have said this clearly. He is allowed. There is no rule. There is no requirement. We are not performing anything for anyone. He does not leave it open every evening. The same deliberate motion. Hand on iron. Lift. Step through. I asked him once why. He thought about it for a moment. Because I want to choose it, he said. Every time. With my own hand, he looked at the latch. I spent 11 years being moved, being managed, having things decided around me and announced to me and called my own. He looked at me. I want to be a man who walks through his own door, not a king who is assumed to be where he belongs. I looked at him. It is a latch, I said. Yes, he said. It is, and that was the whole of it. That was the answer, a latch, fixed by the hands that fixed it, chosen by the hands that choose it, every evening, because choosing matters more than ownership, and entering matters more than residing, and a door you walk through deliberately is a different thing entirely from a door you simply never bother to close. Gray disagrees with all of this on principle. Gray enters through the kitchen window, every time, without variation, without apology. The kitchen window is, in Gray's assessment, the correct entrance. It delivers him directly to the honey stores, to Brennan's chair, to the warmest corner near the fire, and bypasses the entire philosophical question of latches and choice and deliberate entry. Because Gray made his choice about where he belonged approximately 5 minutes into meeting me in a yard in Grafen, and has not reconsidered it since. Some things you cannot teach an animal who knew the truth before anyone else did. And here is what I have come to understand in the month since. The things that matter rarely announce themselves properly. They arrive like Gray arrived. In your yard before sunrise, having rearranged your woodpile, sitting in the middle of everything you thought you knew about your morning, looking at you with the patient certainty of something that has already decided. And you can say, no. You can pick up your bellows and turn back to your work. You can be very busy with a hive that does not need you. You can put your hands over your eyes and hope it works in both directions, or you can stand in the doorway and look at what has shown up and let yourself see what it is, not what you planned for, not what makes sense from the outside, what it actually is. A man who cannot finish a sentence in a yard because the sentence ends with something he has not yet let himself say out loud. A court full of people watching you hold an iron rail until your hand bleeds because you will not be made small and you will not let the noise swallow what is true. A wolf who walks the full length of a council hall without hurrying because he has never once doubted his direction and sees no reason to start now. Some things are not choices that get made once. Some things are choices that get made every evening. Hand on iron, lift step through, Not because you are required to, because you want to, because it is yours. And that is what a kept promise looks like when it is lived in, rather than simply declared. Not ceremony, not decree. Just a door that catches clean, and someone who chooses it, every time, with their own hand.